can earn your degree around your schedule. University of Mary tuition is competitive. Its value unsurpassed, and financial aid is available. Call toll-free 877-868-6279 today to learn more. 877-868-6279. Remember Measure 5 on the ballot last year that increased penalties for malicious animal cruelty? Hundreds of North Dakotans from all across the state gathered signatures in true grassroots form and got a question on the ballot to protect animals. It didn't pass because of promises to address it during the legislative session. That time is now. Senate Bill 2211 would make us the 49th state to treat animal cruelty as a felony. But it has a few loopholes that need fixing. Remember the neglected 250 horses outside of Bismarck? Under this bill, hundreds of animals neglected count as only one incident. And another provision would let people off the hook if they could show they were breeding or raising animals, creating a loophole for puppy mills and other large-scale breeders. North Dakotans expect a stronger cruelty law. If you agree, let your legislators know now. It's about protecting animals in a reasonable, common-sense fashion. Find out more at ndstopcruelty.com. ndstopcruelty.com. Paid for by North Dakotans to Stop Animal Cruelty. Christy Skungberg, Chairman.
When you are looking for the one-stop shop, Hedals has it. Not only do they have the repair parts, paint, batteries, and maintenance items, they also repair radiators, gas tanks, hydraulic hoses, and have a full-service machine shop. Need a particular color paint? They can scan your item and put any color into a user-friendly aerosol spray can. Their professional staff will assist you with the right part for every situation. Hedals Auto Plus.
Look, Hedals has it today.
Almost 70% of North Dakotans polled support a minimum starting salary of $36,000 for our teachers. Yet a 10-year-old state law sets the minimum at just $22,500. And while current beginning salaries average $32,000, and despite a record budget surplus, many beginning teachers are paid less. It's time to tell our legislators to make the current average salary the law. It's the least they can do for our teachers.
A message from the North Dakota Education Association.
It's auto auction time this Saturday at Northland Auto Auction. Call us at 663-1561 or check us out online at northlandautoauction.com. Come to buy, come to sell this Saturday at Northland Auto Auction in Mandan.
Here's your AccuWeather.com forecast. Breezy with rather cloudy skies. Tonight's low 12. Clouds and breaks of sunshine otherwise. Breezy and not as cold. Thursday high 34. Partly cloudy skies. Thursday night low 18. Times of clouds and sunny skies. Friday high 31. Partly sunny skies Saturday and Sunday. Saturday's high 34. Sunday's high 27. With your AccuWeather.com forecast, I'm Michael Stack.
Temperatures across North Dakota this hour: Williston 16 degrees, Dickinson 22, Minot 11, Garrison 18 degrees, Hettinger 28, Jamestown 17, Devils Lake 16, Grand Forks 19, and Fargo Moorhead right now 23. Bismarck and Mandan, we have a clear sky, little to no wind, 63% relative humidity. Barometer is on the rise at 30.27, and currently here at K-Fire it is 15 degrees.
All right, you guys did a good job. I think Jim was going to be maybe a little late. I think I heard that.
Well, the Legislature Today show continues. Don't forget to check local listings for a nightly recap on a cable access channel near you. The Legislature Today, hosted by Dale Wetzel, managing editor of Great Plains News and the Great Plains Examiner. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, too. And now, back to the Legislature Today show.
This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today. We are coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. We have with us this evening Mr. Scott Davis, who is the director of the North Dakota Indian Affairs Commission, which is a liaison between the Indian tribes in North Dakota and the governor and state government. Mr. Davis is a member of the governor's cabinet. We also have with us Mr. Jamie Pinkham, who is a vice president for Native Nations at the Bush Foundation in St. Paul, Minnesota. The Bush Foundation is in the midst of a program to train new Native leaders in its territory, which includes North and South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And Mr. Pinkham, can you tell us how what is the end result? What is the hoped for result from this Rebuilders program? What is the goal?
Well, our goal is to put spirited community leaders willing to work with their elected leaders so that you could have this joint conversations between the political leadership and the community on what the expectations are for their governments. And so, having people like Scott and other rebuilders from the 23 tribes to help provide that kind of support. It's sharing the responsibility of rebuilding a nation. It's not just the political leadership, but it's leaders within the community. So our aspiration is to create this cohort of leaders, and not just within a tribe, but to even exchange ideas and support between tribes in the region we serve.
How satisfied have you been with the folks that you've been training?
Well, I think
we have one of them here, so you got to kind of tread carefully here.
Yeah, no, I have to tread carefully. I can honestly say this is exactly what Scott has met what the tribal leaders has told us they wanted. They want members of the Native nations working in all aspects of government, not just for the tribes, but like in Scott's position. Here's a young man who, in a way, has to walk a tightrope. Kind of serving the needs of the state, the legislature, he's the governor. At the same time, the tribal leaders are having expectations on him to respect and understand sovereignty. So here we have a person who's gone through the rebuilder's language, who understands the needs of the tribes, but also kind of the demands and expectations of the state. So I think he's a well-placed rebuilder for us. We also have rebuilders who are serving on tribal councils right now, those that work in top leadership positions and in the tribal programs, and some even from the urban community, because building nations is about citizenship. Regardless of where they live, they can play an important part in helping support their tribal nations.
And how much of an objective is there to get not only leaders trained, but also to get more civic engagement from the person in the street?
Well, that's interesting, because when we started rolling out this nation-building philosophy with the tribal leaders, first they wanted to build this common conversation, a dialogue around their council table. But then he said, we need to take this conversation to our community so that they're talking the same language. For example, this past November, we did an open community session at Sisseton Wahpeton, where we just opened the door and anybody could come in. Actually, they broadcast it live over their radio station. It's to get that conversation information out to the community, too. So it is important to get it to the people out on the street.
What's the reception of the people to an initiative like this? Are they hopeful? Are they cynical? Are they bored? What's their reaction?
Well, I think it depends on who you talk to. Again, for me, it's opportunity. I've always looked at these things as opportunity. And Jamie and I have disagreed on some things on their approach, and I've been vocal about that.
Tell us about some of the things you've disagreed about.
Well, I think in all honesty, I think their approach on focusing on tribal government alone, just the councils, and because they change every 2 to 4 years, the sustainability behind that versus focusing all their energy on tribal colleges. There you have people that go there obviously to learn. You have an energy level that's really a high level, very passionate, and those tribal students bring those issues back to their respective local district, the smaller communities on the reservations. That's where a lot of the focus needs attention. Cannonball, White Shield, St. Michael's, Dunseith, St. John, all those small communities out there in North Dakota that really needs a lift, if you will, but still a little bit dependent upon tribal councils to do this and that for them. Where I'm saying that kind of is in unison with the Bush Foundation is that, hey, let's take local ownership of our issues. Yeah, we have housing problems. Okay, how are we gonna get that to the next level here locally without depending upon tribal councils? So those are the exercises I've tried to been, respectively trying to steer the Bush Foundation into focusing more on the tribal colleges versus the tribal leadership because of the changeover.
I mean, what role do you see the tribal colleges playing here?
Well, they're the conduit. They're the most stable, active tribal entity on the reservation. In my opinion, not any disrespect towards tribal government because that's obviously the leadership there. But when I really think long term to turn this thing around, turn things around for housing, for all the issues that we're talking about here, it needs to come from the people. It needs to be taught. It needs to be learned, I guess. It needs to be directed in a different way, away from dependency. Dependency away from the federal government, dependency away from the state government, away from tribal government. It's really ownership that's going to be taught at the tribal college level, and they're doing that anyway. Every one of them are doing a great job, and I'm kind of a little biased when I say that because my father's a tribal college president too.
Yeah.
So believe me, him and I talk a lot about this stuff, and but the Bush Foundation, they're here. I mean, again, opportunity is here, and you got to make the best of it. And at the end of the day, you walk away from my cohort, my 2 years of doing that. My wife was in the cohort too. My brother-in-law was in the cohort too. You have your own theory of where, as a tribal leader, as a tribal citizen, where we should be. And if that's on par with everybody, great. If that's different from everything, great. But it provides a huge think tank and an action plan after that, and it develops a theory, your own theory. And so it just goes back to ownership.
How much difficulty, frankly, is posed by the fact that you have these various jurisdictions on the reservation? I mean, you have the tribal government, you have the federal government, you have the state government, and things get very, frankly, confusing when who's in charge of what and who has jurisdiction over what, and how much of a inherent difficulty is this when you're talking about nation building?
Yeah. Well, I'm from the Nez Perce tribe, which is out in the Pacific Northwest, and we have a checkerboard reservation. And so you have 4 county governments and multiple cities. You got tribal land, private land, state land, and it's just a jurisdictional nightmare.
Sounds like the Fort Berthold reservation.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so what we had to do was get confidence in each other's political systems as well as legal systems, where we felt confident that we could do cross-deputization and that their officers were trained, to enforce our laws. We had the ability to enforce their laws. So it was confidence in the laws that they'd be administered fairly, and as well as trying to find confidence in each other's court system, that you'd be treated fairly. It's not easy. Tribes are the oldest governments in this country, but they're still the most misunderstood. So there's this perception, I think, that still exists that tribes really just don't have the capacity, for law enforcement and legal systems. And, quite honestly, nothing could be further from the truth. We look at tribes that are developing, this capacity to do it. And so, that's why we look at people like Scott is, how do you try to find the bridges of understanding and not rely on this misperception about or the fear that tribes are exercising jurisdictions over non-Indians on a reservation.
Mr. Davis, to what extent has the legislature been helpful this session? The chairman of the Turtle Mountain Band came, made a speech to the joint session, said, we could use your help on some things. How forthcoming has that help been? Well,
I really like the quote that the chairman McLeod used, and I know he was on the radio show too. He's looking for an upper hand, not a helping hand, but just an upper hand. Just help me just a little bit to get over the hump here. That's what he's asking for, and I appreciate that. He's not asking for do this for me, because he's an elected official as well. But I tell you, the legislative process is such a fascinating process where, the House side, the Senate side, then you got crossover. You got this process where you really got to defend upon what you're so adamant about. Prove to me, and I always put my legislator hat on too, from time to time too, and try to play that role, try to get into the minds of those legislators. But it's so important. That's why I made it. I was very adamant today with our rebuilders today about get to know those legislators. Be here, be present. This is your capital. You're a North Dakota citizen. Take advantage of that.
Is that the biggest thing, frankly, is to know the legislators and have them know you?
Absolutely. When Jim gets here, I can guarantee you that Jim Casper probably knew very little about tribal colleges 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I'm just throwing that out there. I could be wrong. But how do you utilize a representative, Jim Casper from Fargo, that's probably never lived on a reservation, maybe had a few reservation friends, tribal friends, and so forth? How do you convince him? Because he has some political power, some political clout in this legislative process. So if Dale Wetzel, Representative Wetzel, has some power, obviously I'm going to go to him and to help him try to convince and get him on my side, so to speak. And that's a process. So it's a number of ways, but it's you see the benefits. I mean, I just keep going back to the tribal colleges of where they're at now. I mean, to me, and I've said this many times, that the tribal college bill that's in the works right now is a national model of how a tribal entity, a tribal government, has exercised its sovereignty in a way, but how they've managed to work and convince the legislative session, the powers that be, that this legislative bill is a good thing.
I'd like you to talk about that for a moment. You said it's a national model. How is it a national model?
Well, it's a process. I mean, I think there's a misconception. It's probably just a mainstream, a common citizen approach where I'm going to go to the legislative process and they're going to hear my spiel about a law or bill, and I'll get funded for it. Not so. Not so. We all know that. And so maybe that's kind of the mindset of some of our tribal members. Some of it's maybe, well, we're sovereign nations. We more or less answer to the feds and not the state. And I debate that all the time. But yeah, it's a national model because I've seen, watching it from 12 years ago, 10 years ago, adamant about funding non-native students that attend tribal colleges. There is no funding for them. So tribal colleges got together, they're organized, they had a plan, they recruited, they lobbied, they did their due diligence, and now they can walk down those hallways and those legislators know them. They know where they stand on a certain issue, and that's a great thing.
And that took some time. I remember when the issue of state aid to tribal colleges first came up, and the state was not in the flush financial shape that it is now, and people were thinking, oh,
why?
this is why should they thought, why should we do this? They also thought it was frankly a step to having the tribal colleges as part of the state system, and people didn't want that. And now it's really quite amazing to me how this has become accepted. The notion that tribal colleges should receive support from the state, and the reasons and justification for doing that are fairly well known and well accepted now, and that certainly wasn't the case several years ago.
Oh,
in fact,
absolutely.
it was the opposite.
And then you have tribes at the table now too. The MHA tribe up in Newtown, they've been at this for 2 years now about their taxation bill. It's taken them such a long time through the tribal state relations meetings with the governor, meetings with the legislative leadership. You just see these things going on and on. It's like it's such a great thing. And I'm like, yes, this is why my office is doing what we're doing. You just set the table and you create dialogue, you debate, you go back and forth. And it comes down to a plan, but really, it's at the end of the day, I think we all as North Dakotans, tribal citizens, tribal nations, we all want the same thing. We want to reap the good benefits of the good life that we're having here in North Dakota, but it's going to take some more effort, some more understanding, some more learning curves, some education, and trust on each side.
To what extent, I'm sure both of you gentlemen can talk about this, but to what extent is there the need to impress upon people that this takes time? I mean, especially, the legislature, it seems like you can beat your head against the wall for years and years before you finally get the message through. Well,
and that's my message to the tribe. Say, don't look at this as anti-tribal. There are many political subdivisions out there, nonprofits that come to legislators, and they're in the same shoes as you are. The legislators have said no to them. Maybe they haven't had their ducks in a row, so to speak. So keep coming back. Critique yourself. Ask for constructive criticism from those legislators of, okay, we didn't make it this time, but how are we going to do it this time? And use those 2-year window frames of our biennium to keep lobbying for your efforts too. So again, it's a great process. And it's going to change. It's evolving. But I really think we're in a time where our tribes are really understanding the value of this legislative process and getting engaged with the legislative session.
Mr. Pinkham, how is the success of this Rebuilders program going to be measured? Do you have metrics for it or anything like that?
That's a good question to ask anybody from a foundation is how do you measure your success? And actually, what we want to do is find the appropriate measures working with the tribes, because if we as a foundation set our own outcomes and measures, it's like taking the agenda away from the tribal leaders. And so we want to work with them to find out what is the most critical indicators of the success of the Rebuilders program. And so in the future, we want to be having those conversations with the tribes. And let me add that, because I respect Scott's, earlier before we went to break, I was talking about, we need to work through the tribal leaders. And once we gain this entry on self-determination nation building with the tribal leaders, it's up to them to set the table. And if they want the tribal colleges included as part of the nation building agenda, it's up to them. So I can't tell the tribal leaders who must come to this table. And you were asking about the criticism, and we've been criticized for this approach. It's new for a foundation. They've never worked at this level. People think this nation building strategy is a grassroots-led effort. You know what? And I think they're exactly right, and I'm not going to argue with that. But still, our entry point to come work into these sovereign nations need to be through the political leaders. And once they open the door, then we look for where we can maneuver and bring in additional partners and community members and institutions from the tribes to support this work.
And how long of a process do you see this being?
Well, the foundation, we've set this for a goal for the decade, but I tell you, it's going to take longer than a decade, because as Scott was pointing out, tribes have over 10,000 years of the civic and social kind of unwritten constitutions that have survived, but over the last 200 years, those have changed. So we're not going to see a change overnight. And so it's going to be a long-term process, and in some places it may take more than a generation. But gosh, we got to start somewhere.
See, one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting about this process was, to what extent is there going to be an examination of the traditional, if I could use the term, the traditional methods of tribal leadership, and how do you adapt those to be effective in the age in which we live?
Well, there's models out there that are still very, very traditional, where there are not appointed, but I know down some of the southern tribes, you don't run for council, you're asked to run. I mean, I know Jamie's has more experience in that area with other tribes around the nation, but
for example, there's one of the Pueblos in New Mexico. They have a constitution, but it's unwritten. And it's the social understanding that's been passed through time about who gets picked for what leadership position, what role do they play. We see tribes like the Navajo Nation that have a traditional peacekeeper. It's part of their court system, resolving disputes the old way rather than kind of Western litigation. So we see this emergence of these traditional practices being brought forward to try to match them up in contemporary times.
Because I was thinking it's more of an oral culture than a written culture, and how does one adapt that to having things like a constitution and even a court system? It's
like a feeling or a knowledge of being institutionalized. I call it that's just how it is here. It's tradition here. It's institutionalized knowledge that that's just how things are here in Fort Yates, Standing Rock, or here in Bismarck. So it's the way we do things here.
Yeah,
unwritten.
Mr. Davis, how would you compare tribal-state relations now from where they were 10 or 15 years ago?
Well, hopefully trying to critique myself is always hard, but I kind of leave that up to my colleagues out there. I sure hope that they've improved. I've listed 25 state agencies that I work directly with. I work closely with the AG's office, Supreme Court, the Commissioner Fong, Commissioner Ham on everything. So I have that relationship with them, and it's a good one. It's one of understanding, one of respect of jurisdiction and so forth. But I really believe, Dale, that it is good. It is good. I looked to my counterpart down in South Dakota, and we had members from the court that were down there, and they were very, very truthful and honest, saying, you know what, our state is just not there. Our tribes are not there. But boy, your state up here in North Dakota and you tribes, how do you guys get along so well? How do you do that? So I feel like I have a big role in that. I try to keep the peace, so to speak, keep things out of court, so forth, sit down and talk. It's always been my approach, and being the middleman is always brokering those meetings is really important to me. But it takes, I guess, the understanding of the state leadership and the tribal leadership, and bringing those parties together. So it's walking a fine line, I can tell you that much.
Mr. Pinkham, does the Bush Foundation have any future projects along these lines, in the thought process at least, something that would affect the Indian nations in its service territory that comes after this?
Yeah, actually, as part of our goal, one of the things that we want to do is how do we foster these intergovernmental relations, helping tribes and their neighboring governments maybe overcome years of conflict, or also how to share in their resources and their expertise. In some of these reservations, they probably have the strongest infrastructure in rural communities. There's examples where tribes want to be able to respond to emergencies collectively and not disrespect or disregard where those political boundaries are, because when you need to respond, whether it's in a medical emergency or a law enforcement emergency, you need to do it. And so if there's ways that the Bush Foundation can help support these collaborations between governments, that's a part of our goal area too.
Mr. Davis, I think it's fair to say that Indian tribes have certain advantages when it comes to economic development, advantages from the federal government, and also I'm thinking about the advantages that the 3 affiliated tribes have in terms of their water rights to the Missouri River. To what extent are these being used to attempt to diversify the economies on the reservations?
Well, I think for the most part, in studying the economics of our tribes, a lot of it's agriculture, a lot of it's land-based economies, because we are in the Great Plains region, large land-based tribes up here, treaty tribes. And so there is a lot of advantages of utilizing water, natural resources, obviously the energy-related resources we have. But then you look at, like, say, Turtle Mountain, who's really 6 by 12, but has a large number of allotted lands across the state. How do you utilize those natural resources to their benefit? And it takes, I talked about the Uniform Commercial Code. What are the rules for economic development on our reservations? How do we understand that? So if I'm a developer wanting to come in and build widgets, provide some jobs through manufacturing on a tribe, what are the rules, the tribal rules here, and how does that tie in with agreements and contracts, and where they're secure and safe? Where I've seen is the Crow tribe, the Pine Ridge tribe, and the Leech Lake tribe have all entered into agreements with the Secretary of State, an MOU, if you will, on secure transactions. So that's another thing I'm working on in regards to economic development, and so that each side knows the rules and that it's safe and it's trustable again.
Yeah, and actually, this is where the Bush Foundation wants to partner with tribes too, because as the evidence has pointed out, many tribes will assert their jurisdiction and their sovereignty, and they leap up to select projects and implement them. But we're saying, there's some steps in the middle that we want to help shore up. One is, do you have the right laws and policies? For example, the UCC. Do you have these institutions that provide a legal and administrative infrastructure to support diversifying economies?
We've been speaking to Mr. Jamie Pinkham. He is the Vice President for Native Nations for the Bush Foundation, a member of the Nez Perce tribe. And the Bush Foundation is based in St. Paul, Minnesota. They have financed what's called a nation rebuilding project amongst Indian tribes in North and South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. We also have with us this evening Mr. Scott Davis, the director of the Indian Affairs Commission in North Dakota. He is the liaison between North Dakota's Indian tribes and the governor's office, and he's a member of the governor's cabinet. Gentlemen, we've had, I think, a fascinating conversation this evening, and I appreciate your coming by, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we will see you tomorrow night.
The Legislature Today is brought to you